my philosophy is that wellness is an effort. I'm a blogger for Psychology Today, and one of my articles is titled "Wellness is an Effort." And what I mean by that is that we are pre-wired to anticipate the worst because that helped us stay alive. And it was evolutionary to look towards the worst and anticipate the worst. We have not evolved to the extent that now we're looking towards the positive, even though that would be much more beneficial to our mental and physical health if we were more optimistic. We are still, our default mindset is to be negative. So if we acknowledge this, this changes the complete dialogue of what is okay and what's not in terms of normality, right? Because if it's normal to worry and to be anxious, abnormal is to not be anxious. And all of a sudden, we really expand what the term normality means and expand those to which we have to reach, and also expand going from a month to a way of life that we have to constantly tend to make sure we're not focusing on the negative, which is what our default mindset is. So I think when we hear people speak, what I talk about in the personal narrative, when it comes to in the workplace, when you have people who are leaders, who are bold enough to share their own stories of struggles and anxiety, it kind of says, oh, you know, I'm like everybody else. I am normal. Dr. Gruttadauria, do you want to speak with that at all?
You know, it's you bring up a terrific point when it comes to the idea of, you know, danger and, you know, I'm okay. You know, we have this idea that 1 in 5 people suffers with mental illness, and that implies that 4 out of 5 are fine. Yet we all are dealing with stress. I mean, we live in a very stressful time in our country. You know, we all have individual stresses at home and in our careers. And the reality is that stress changes our neurology and our biochemistry. But we don't think about it that way. We just think about it as, oh my God, I feel stressed. And what happens is over time, that stress is actually part of that. And you've discussed this before, is it's actually there to help with survival. For instance, if you know, for thousands of years, we were hunter-gatherers walking around, and if we heard a bear in the woods, we would get that feeling of, oh my goodness, like there's a bear there. Our brain would change and it would shift something in our body called the Hpa Axis, which is, you know, an area of the brain that controls our adrenaline system and our cortisol system and our adrenal glands and so on. That fight or flight mechanism is meant to be on less than 1% of the time. 99+% of the time, our body's supposed to be in rest and digest mode. But in our society, we're in that fight or flight mode constantly because of the way we live. And as a result, it changes us chemically and neurologically. And now what we label that is anxiety. So, you know, is anxiety a disease, or is it really just a series of dysfunctions that have happened as a result of chronic stress? And unless we understand how to reduce the physiological changes as well as handle these emotional challenges that we have, we're never going to feel better. And so, you know, I mean, you talk about it's okay to not be okay. I had a bad car accident when I was in graduate school, and I went through a windshield. And after the head trauma and the neck injury healed, about 3 months later, I was driving and I had a full-blown panic attack. And it persisted and it got worse and worse and worse. And now I'm at my doctor and I'm getting MRIs, I'm getting all these things. And I said, listen, I just had this massive head trauma. And they said, it has nothing to do with your head injury. You have anxiety, you have OCD, you have depression. And I said, no, I don't have any of those things. I have a great life. And I suffered in silence because nobody believed me that this was a physical injury. And it was literally 4 or 5 years of dealing with this on a regular basis before I figured out that I needed to do neurological rehabilitation to make it better. And it just bothers me that, you know, we have this frame of mind that, you know, that the stigma that you referred to, that, you know, only certain number of people have these things, but we're all dealing with them all the time.
Yeah. And I think the personal narrative is so important. And you know, the idea that you mentioned, same here, The concept being that same here, Mike and I participated in same here day at City Field, where athletes and people came together that, hey, we're all in this together. And, Rich is somebody who shares his personal narrative. And I think, when you hear leaders like Rich talk about it, you're like, it kind of allows you to take a deep breath and say, I'm not alone.
Right. And you're right on. Look, after COVID, I start off any civic group or meeting with employees. Tell me one person who you don't know who wasn't negatively impacted by COVID, whether it be the physical of COVID, but more importantly, the mental. And how many of us were afraid, not sure, having sleepless nights. And I kind of joke about, when I'm talking to people, I say, yeah, well, my therapist says I'm crazy. So, and it gets into the conversation of, it's okay, like you say, to not be okay. And when you can talk about it, I experienced something similar to what Dr. Mike described back in 2015. Was depressed, not eating properly, lost 30 pounds, which in my case might not be a bad thing. But it didn't look good after I lost 30 pounds because it wasn't who I was. And I knew that there were a lot of issues, and I was going to doctors to check out what was wrong and why I wasn't this and that. And it ended up where when I went to a new therapist, she told me, she said, you've got a lot of issues, that you need to talk through and work through in order to get back on the horse. And so I spent probably a good almost a year with her. She saved my life because there were times when I at night and the mind plays crazy games on you that I was not in a good state. And I was the town supervisor. I was a party chairman of the Democratic Party. I had a lot of, people at me and a lot of responsibilities. And yet I was also having to continue to deal with this issue. And I opened up about it and talked to in public gatherings. And I've had so many people come up to me and say, thank you for saying something, because I can't believe, Rich Schaffer, the supervisor, has this going on. I'm going through the same thing, or my daughter's going through the same thing, or my husband. And it's gotten, again, like I said, the joke is I'm the therapist in chief, but it's because I've been able to show the human side of a local leader, that we all go through it and it's okay. And it's best to talk about it instead of keeping it, wrapped up inside, or going on, like Dr. Mike described, the wild goose chase about what's really going on there. So that's why your philosophy, Rob, of making this every day has got to be, because look, the strongest muscle in the body is the brain. You can argue the heart if you want, but I argue the brain is the strongest muscle, because when that brain is not working properly, not firing on all cylinders, or has been impacted because of stress and anxiety and all the things that, like Dr. Mike says, change the neurological and chemical makeup of the body, you're really off kilter, and you're going to experience a really bad time, that if you don't deal with it on a regular basis, and I say a daily basis, you're going to end up in big trouble.
So since we're all sharing, I will tell my story. I've had a lot of stories, but I think one of the most traumatic events in my life that really made me who I am today, and I think a positive way, was having a client die in jail right before sentencing. And we as lawyers have that mindset to always look for a blame. And the first person I blamed was myself. And I had a hard time getting out of bed, because I was seeing my clients who were in arraignments and were being arrested, but I would see that client's head, who had passed, on top of their body. So it was, I didn't know at the time, but I was suffering with a form of post traumatic stress disorder. It was really, really difficult for me that time. So, and being a lawyer, you mentioned, Rich, about, you know, being a town supervisor, the head of the Democratic Party, and then always feeling like you're under attack. Those things just feed into the anxiety.
Mhm.
So when and it's what we'll talk about is the occupational mindset that comes with the position.